Well, welcome everybody to the Beards and Bible podcast. I'm your host, Morgan Freeman. You better get busy living. I'll get busy dying. My guest today is Matthew McConaughey. Matthew, how are things on your Texas ranch?
Don't expect me to do a Matthew McConaughey impersonation.
All right. That's the best I got.
Yeah.
Hey, Gabe, how you doing, man? It's just me, Josh. It's not really Morgan Freeman.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Whew.
Yeah.
No, I was actually starting to think for a second, like, what's the deal with your voice, man?
Yeah. I don't know. So right after we recorded our last episode with our wives, I got like really sick that night. And I had like a 24-hour fever thing going on and like couldn't get out of bed. It was horrible. And then I felt better and I just had this like really, really deep cough thing going on. And then it started getting better. And then, I don't know what it was. I went into the last weekend with a little bit of a raspiness, and then I preached 4 times, and then Sunday afternoon, I was like, my voice has dropped like 2 octaves. It's incredible. And I'm like, I mean, it's probably needs to get better before this weekend because I got to preach another 4 times, but I mean, I could do amazing things with it. I could be Morgan Freeman. Well, it's Morgan Freeman. I can sing the song, the Crash Test Dummies. Once there was this kid who got into an accident and couldn't come to school, but I mean that's a benefit.
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah,
it's like God's gift recompense for you getting sick.
Yeah,
for men at least, when you have that low raspy voice and you're like, oh yes, I survived that experience so that I could have this gift.
Thank you, Lord.
You like talk to your wife and you're like, hey,
hey, baby, can't get enough of your love, baby. That's great. That's great.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And I'm sure all of this is invoking a ton of confidence in anyone who's listening for the first time and they're like, oh, they're talking about anti-Semitism. Sure, I will tune into this and see. I'm on the fence about anti-Semitism. And then they start this podcast and they're like, oh, wow.
Yeah, we've got Morgan Freeman. Wow, I didn't know he was an advocate for the Jewish people. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, Gabe, how you doing, man? Enough about me. Let's talk about you.
I'm doing great. Since our last, I think I was really sick. I must have given it to you through the interwebs.
I think so.
But no, got over that. I ran my first half marathon on Sunday.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We ran, Dothan, the city of Dothan has a big 4-laned highway that goes around it in a circle. They call it the Circle City. And, it's a 13-mile long circle. I guess they didn't plan on it being half a marathon. But anyway, so now the race organizers capitalize on that and they do a half marathon race around the city of Dothan. And they call it Run the Circle. Yeah, so there was about 150 of us that ran it. My stepbrother Chris ran alongside me, and awesome. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, dude. So was it mostly flat, or did you have some hills?
There were some hills. And, it's funny when you're like driving around the circle, you don't notice the hills. I remember there was one. I knew for a fact that there was one. I was like, okay. And I was even telling Chris, I was like, once we get over this hill, I think this is it. This is the hill, We got over that hill, and that was definitely not the only hill. There was actually hills that were far worse than that, but I just could not remember them.
Yeah.
Because they're real gradual, so they take like a mile and they go uphill for like a mile, and so. Yeah, they were smokers for sure, but it was cool though. I beat my personal. Yeah. I beat my personal record. I think I did it in an hour and 56 minutes.
Nice. Sub 2. That's great, dude. That's really good.
Yeah. I was moving. Yeah. When you start up at the start line and they have these like pacing groups and these guys with like flags are standing there and you choose like what group and what speed you want to run with. This is all new to me. I had never done this before. So I knew based on our training that we probably wanted to hang out with the 2-hour group.
Yeah.
And so we were at the front of the 2-hour group when they started the race. And then we kind of got sucked into the back in the tail end of the 1 hour 30 or 1 hour 40-minute group. And we just kind of morphed into that group, and we kept up with them.
Yeah.
And that was a bad decision.
Yeah.
That was painful. We ran the first mile in like 8 minutes and 15 seconds, which for runners, that's slow if you do this on a regular basis.
That is slow, but
for
not
us,
if you're running 13 miles. That's pretty fast. Yeah.
Yeah, and then my last mile was like 7 minutes 51 seconds, which was the fastest of them all. And I just by then was ready for it to be over. And
dude. What was so you probably averaged out like 8:45, 8:50 to do a sub 2?
Yeah, somewhere in that range. Yeah. So we got our full marathon next month. No, wow, this month. Goodness, it's already November.
Dang, dude.
Yeah, wow. Down in Cocoa Beach, Florida.
Nice.
So
that's awesome, man.
You finish the half marathon, and you're like, okay, in a month I'm gonna run double this distance. That is terrifying.
So everybody I know that has done a full marathon, I've not done one yet. I have a goal to do one before I turn 40, which is coming up in a couple of years. But they say that you assume that running a full marathon is just twice as hard as running a half.
Mm-hmm.
But they said actually it's like 10 times harder.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, so I don't know if that was the worst thing ever to tell you, getting ready for your first full, but to be mentally prepared, just to know that the human body can train to run 20 miles, but then the last 6 is just pure adrenaline for everyone I've talked to that's done it. But once you break that glass ceiling for the first time, like your first one's always the hardest. Apparently it gets easier, and there are guys I know that just keep up a base mileage of running, and then at any time can go run a full marathon.
That would be cool. I mean, people say you get the itch, like after a big race, and I was definitely sitting on the couch Sunday night after the half marathon on my phone looking at different half marathons and marathons in the area. Like I'm like, I gotta, you get that. I don't know. It's just weird, psychotic like longing to do another long run and race.
Man. It's a very emotional thing. Like I don't think anybody can understand it unless you've done it. Like I've actually gotten emotional crossing the finish line because you put so much time and energy and effort and training into this goal, and then you cross the finish line and there's people that are cheering, and especially if you, like your family shows up and stuff, man, it's an emotional thing. Like
it sure is.
It's probably why the Apostle Paul wrote so much about racing and running and finishing your race and all that stuff, and the great cloud of witnesses the writer of Hebrews writes about. So
yeah.
Like how I did that,
like
how Jesus juked it, brought it in.
Yeah, check your heart.
Check your heart, absolutely. So
Jesus is king.
Jesus is king, and Jesus walks, and I want to talk to God, but we ain't spoken so long. Another Kanye lines. I guess the question anyone clicking on this episode might have is this: what did Kanye West say this time? Because if you know who Kanye West is, you know that he has had a long history of saying inflammatory, bombastic, crazy things. And, he's in the news again because he did it again. He said something crazy, but not just one comment. He doubled down, and he's made multiple comments. But, Gabe, who is Kanye West for somebody that clicked on this and they're just like, I don't know who that is?
Kanye? And you mean Ye?
Ye, I'm sorry. He goes by Ye at this time.
Yeah.
Not by Kanye.
Come on, Josh.
I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, Kanye is, I mean, gosh, like one of the most, if not the most influential rappers of this decade, of the past couple decades, maybe. He hit the billionaire status as net wealth and worth. Extremely,
but mainly from fashion, right? Fashion, sneakers, shoes, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Extremely successful in business, extremely powerful in his voice and influence in American popular culture. Has recently, I don't know, had a a bit of a crisis, identity crisis, maybe. I would stand to reason, probably starting back at his salvation experience that happened. When was that? 2018, 2019?
2019, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
he claimed to have a conversion. So he, said that he was now a follower of Jesus, that he'd gotten saved, and man, it's kind of interesting. Like a lot of celebrities that claim that, you're like, okay, well, what does that even mean? But apparently there was a church in Southern California that was like a Calvary Chapel type, like even evangelical Bible believing, like not a mega church, not a big church by any means. Kanye West, I guess, found out about it from some connection, and he started showing up and sitting in the back. And this is like not a big church. I mean, a couple hundred people. This is like a gospel teaching, Bible believing, And I heard an interview with that pastor that talked to him. Is like, yeah, man, he like understands the gospel and like understands like his need for repentance and conversion, and like has claimed like a true saving faith in Christ. And that was 2019. And of course, he put out that big album. Was that fall of 2019 or spring of 2020? The Jesus is King album. Do you remember?
I don't remember. I remember streaming it when I was teaching school and my students were taking so it's 2019, October 2019.
Okay.
I remember streaming it in the classroom and just playing it on YouTube in the background as my kids were taking a test. And they were like, "What? You're into Kanye and all that stuff?" And I was like, "No, I'm listening to his new album." Trying to be all cringe and stuff for them. So that was October 2019.
Yeah. So since then, he's done some crazy antics. So he came out with Jesus is King, which is a complete gospel album. Everything in it is about Jesus and about the Lord. He ran for president in 2020. Made some really like eyebrow-raising claims about like slavery, saying some things like black people didn't really like some of them chose to be in slavery. I mean, just some really like a lot of it is just really off the wall. Like you're like, what do you mean by that? And then he just goes on these rants that just don't make any sense.
Yeah, a lot of it is very incendiary.
No, yeah, it's very incendiary, and it doesn't make a lot of sense at all. He's come out as being a big Trump supporter, even though he ran for president technically against Trump. He got a divorce from his wife. That's the end of last year, the beginning of this year. His wife, of course, Kim Kardashian, who's kind of her own celebrity brand in her own way. And then his comments recently have been raising even more eyebrows. So, Gabe, what's the gist of basically what he said and why it's been so incendiary?
Well, basically, as he's piling up these weird, nonsensical, incendiary comments, more and more brands and companies are dumping him and distancing themselves from him. Yeah. And then his reaction is very defensive, and he'll make a public statement, usually like on Instagram or Twitter or some other social media platform, and he'll come out and say like very subversive comments about Jews doing this in business or writing contracts or being deceptive, lawyers being Jewish. It's a sudden infatuation with Jews running businesses and somehow screwing him over. Are kind of the gist of the comments, And so he'll make a comment, and then he'll kind of like dial it back a little bit and kind of walk it back just a little bit, halfway apologize, and then like the next couple of days he'll make a even worse comment, and right. So it's like, yeah, and so basically now it's like, all right, it's evident that you hold some pretty dangerous views when it comes to Jews running things, and some very historically anti-Semitic views. These aren't new views,
right.
But yeah,
Yeah, so you sent me a video of, I guess, him being approached by some guys in the paparazzi in the parking lot, some unnamed parking lot. He's just walking across the parking lot. And basically they're like, hey, could you clarify your position on what you said? That, the Jews are running the media, the Jews are running everything, the Jews are to blame, the Jews are the ones that he compared himself to Emmett Till, which I just thought was very disrespectful.
Hmm.
He compared himself to George Floyd,
Yeah.
that the Jews were stepping on his neck and the Jews were lynching him publicly for whistling. I mean, just crazy stuff. And I think the creepiest part of the video is he pulls up his phone, a Excel spreadsheet, and across the Excel spreadsheet there are columns that are highlighted red, and he said every one of these columns represents a Jewish CEO in positions of leadership, and he started naming all these multimedia companies. It was just kind of weird, and then he was basically like, "This is the red media," is what he called it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And basically his premise, and he never, I mean, it's incoherent, some of his ramblings. I mean, he just goes on and on and on and on, and it's just kind of like, what are you saying, dude? But essentially his premise, and you got to watch 20 minutes of him rambling to kind of get what he's getting at, is that there is a kind of global conspiracy of Jews that are running the world and basically coming against black people. Does that seem what he's getting at? Or not just black people, but all people? The Jews are basically corrupt and super powerful, and yeah, I mean that seems to be what I got from that. Is that really what it seems like he's doing?
Yeah, I was really shocked by some of the statements in that video because he said, in essence, he said, when we were released from slavery, we didn't get what we were promised. Instead, we got Planned Parenthood. And then you start to think like, oh, yeah, we got abortion. I'm like, oh, wow. You start to kind of get like worked up and excited that he's about to lambaste Planned Parenthood and the money-making machine that it is. And then he goes into, and that was the bill of goods sold to us by Jewish world leaders. And this is, they lost 6 million people in the Holocaust, but that doesn't compare to the 20 million black babies that are being murdered. And a lot of this is being perpetrated by Jewish business leaders. And you're like, whoa, hold on a second. That's crazy. And
so basically blaming Jewish people for Planned Parenthood and for abortion.
Yeah, and turning, he used the words, turning black mothers into serial killers. And crazy. Yeah, I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And can we talk about the shoes? Did you see his muck boots he was wearing? I mean, like this, he's just walking across his parking lot
like he was
wearing
going out
muck
to
boots.
milk the cows. Yeah.
yeah. He's going to like go finish out a slab that he just poured or something.
Yeah. No, he was seriously wearing like a camo hat and a green hoodie and muck boots. It was the funniest outfit. Like, yeah, that's crazy, man.
But it's crazy when you watch this interview. If you watch it on mute, it's a spontaneous interview that he just kind of walks off to the side. He loves the attention. First of all, you can tell he just loves cameras in his face and stuff. But if you watch, he is like, I mean, a loose cannon is an understatement. He's a loose cannon that's like randomly firing off and hitting people and things on the ship and all kinds of stuff. He is in self-destruct mode. But he's like a hurt little boy who has had probably a very traumatic childhood, trapped in a man's body with tons and tons of money and influence and power, and very gullible and susceptible to all kinds of
what a dangerous combination.
It really is, yeah.
But some people listening to this are going to go, okay, guys, that's Kanye West. Kanye West has said some of the dumbest stuff over the past 20 years. Why is this a big deal? Why is this something that, what do we really need to cancel Kanye West? I mean, that's just dumb. He's that's what he does. But here's what's concerning about it. We said this in the bumper of the show. There has been a rise a significant rise in anti-Semitic incidents over the past few years in the U.S. So I put this stat in the bumper: 941 incidents in 2015, 2,717 incidents in 2021. There was a shooting 4 years ago in a synagogue in Pittsburgh. And then I'm a big college football fan. This past weekend at the Georgia-Florida game in Jacksonville, which is one of the biggest, annual college football games, there was I guess like it was like a fluorescent laser light that somebody had put against the stadium as people were walking in the stadium that says Kanye was right about the Jews, showing up on the stadium. And so not only do you see rise in anti-Semitism in terms of anti-Semitic incidents just happening, you see people coming out of the woodworks in support of Kanye.
Mm-hmm.
And you see people applauding him online, telling him the truth, telling him, man, you're a truth teller. You're being persecuted by the Jews. You're being persecuted by the Jewish-controlled media. You're simply calling out the truth. The basketball player Kyrie Irving recently promoted a book called Hebrews to Negroes, Wake Up Black America. And I went on Amazon and kind of tried to look up. It's now a #1 bestseller on Amazon. And it's essentially a book that promotes a Black Hebrew Israelite group, which, if you're not familiar with Black Israelites, they basically claim that those of Black African descent are actually the true Hebrews and Israelites, and the people that we know as Jewish people are not really Jewish people. They're imposter Jews, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Kanye tweets out his support for Kyrie Irving after Irving received backlash for promoting this book, and Kyrie and Kanye kind of see eye to eye on this stuff. And so, like, I wish I could say this is just one crazy guy that happens to have a lot of money and influence going off on this rant, but it seems like it's not. It is a growing rise of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic conspiracies, all this stuff. And I think what's crazy is, because Kanye leans more conservative and he's like hanging out with Candace Owens and stuff like that, there's a lot of conservative people that see Kanye saying stuff about Planned Parenthood, or see Kanye hanging out with conservative people, or see him with a MAGA hat and go, oh my gosh, Kanye, he's one of us. He's saying the truth. And then, like, they're not able to discern, no, wait a second, what he's saying is like a centuries old anti-Semitic conspiracy that's like really, 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 really dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he said on Twitter that he's going to go DEFCON 3 on the Jews, and he said the funny thing is I actually can't be anti-Semitic because black people are actually Jewish. And I mean, if anyone, first of all, anyone that's that obsessed with race, I would call them, if they claim to be a brother or sister in Christ, I would call them to repentance, because our faith is not based on race or ethnicity whatsoever. We don't erase that. We don't completely ignore that, but that has no place in our faith in terms of our placement, in terms of our closeness to God, our destiny, our eternal destiny. It has nothing to do with that. So, yeah. I mean, it's scary when we get tribal like this and we get fixated on race. But yeah, like you said, there is a historic problematic trend where, because God gave the Jewish people a promise, if Satan can make God out to be a liar and annihilate this people group, he will do it, and he will use demented, he will use unknowing, hateful, hurt people to carry out that plan, and we've seen that time and time again throughout history.
Yeah, and that's what's, I think, fascinating in studying anti-Semitism, which, if you're unfamiliar with that term, it is hostility to, prejudice towards, and discrimination against Jews. That's what Semitism means. Obviously, Semitic, if you look at that word Semite or Semitic, that's kind of a broad term for people living in that part of the world, the Fertile Crescent, all that stuff. But when we use anti-Semitism, we're talking specifically about Jewish people. So, man, there is a long history of anti-Semitism. I just got finished teaching the book of Esther, which details the origin story of Purim, the Jewish holiday. And anti-Semitism in the Persian Empire was so pronounced that it led a guy like Haman to issue an edict that would essentially destroy what historians estimate would be 15 million Jews living across the Persian Empire. And the text of the book of Esther says not just like men, women, children, completely annihilate them, completely destroy them. Like, there were people in the ancient world that literally wanted the Jewish people extinct, wiped off the face of the map. And that has been going on since before Christ. That has been going on, as far back as we can see. And it continues. And I think someone has to take a step back and just go, man, why is that? Why is there this irrational hatred of the Jewish people? How would you answer that, Gabe, if somebody asked you that? Why is there an irrational hatred of the Jewish people?
Well, like I just said, it just goes back to this satanic ploy to make God out to be a liar and to thwart his plan. I mean, Paul says that salvation is unto the Jews first and then to the Gentiles. Yeah. And he knows that this people are a vehicle of sorts of redemption and salvation for the world. And if he can thwart that, if he can demolish this race, he will do it. And it's been tried and tried again. But it's fascinating because the ironic thing is, I personally am strengthened in my faith by looking back and seeing that this is an irrational yet historic trend. It doesn't make any sense. It's not like there's been vast Jewish empires that try to express world domination, like Japan or Germany or others. It's this people that really they want a place to live in security. They want to pray. They do excellent things in terms of business and scientific and medical breakthroughs.
And I want to talk about why that is here in a minute, but keep going.
Yeah, there's something like 22% of Nobel Peace Prize winners. There's are Jewish, and then some are half and three-quarters Jewish. But that's a very unusual statistic in terms of they hold in all the races and ethnicities. These people hold the majority of Nobel Peace Prize winners, and so. It seems to me it's like you said, it's irrational. Any nation would benefit from having a large Jewish population in it if it's looking for medical, scientific, and business success. Right. And I believe that American success in the late 40s and 50s and economic boom that we experienced is due in large because of Jewish immigrants that we took in post World War II. Yeah. So, what were you going to say, though?
Well, I just, somebody listening to this, I mean, unfortunately, there's probably people listening to this that you believe that conspiracy because you've seen Kanye endorse certain conservative ideals, and you've gone, man, Kanye, he's speaking truth. Mm-hmm. And then you see him say, oh, man, the Jews are controlling Hollywood, and the Jews are controlling, mainstream media. The Jews are controlling this, that, and the other. And you started going, well, yeah. I saw that spreadsheet. There are a ton of Jews working in Hollywood. There are a ton of Jews working in legal. Every Jewish person, that Kanye talks about, is it a lawyer or a CEO or so? It is, like you said, statistically speaking, there's a lot higher percentage of Jews that won Nobel Peace Prize and work in medicine or work in legal fields. So. Why did Jews seem like and Jewish people seem to be like the percentage of them working in mainstream media and medical, legal, financial, entertainment? Why is that higher in that particular people group?
That's a tough question to answer, but I think I can make a worthy attempt at it. Number one, they have a supernatural blessing on their lives, and what they set their hands to will typically succeed. And that's not 100%, but they do a fantastic job at what they set their hands to because of God's blessing on these people. Number two, within Jewish culture is this emphasis that is placed on community and familial unity. And then, like we see even within other cultures, like especially like in Asian culture, you see a lot of emphasis placed on education and strong work ethic, and kind of getting ahead. Then you also see within Jewish culture and communities a tight-knit, physical, geographical, like community
Right.
that is lacking in many other cultures. You maybe see this, it can be compared to maybe Hispanic cultures where it's like you live around your family and around your extended family and around all your friends and your neighbors, and you have within your neighborhood a sense of community, and that promotes success in life, that promotes success in education and business. That's really healthy, I would say. And so you see that within the Jewish community. But I would say first and foremost a supernatural blessing on their efforts.
Well, and if you look at the nation of Israel itself, like my father-in-law is a pilot, and he retired from commercial airlines. And now basically what he does is he moves airplanes that are being repurposed for cargo. So let's say Delta is decommissioning an airplane or a jet. And what my father-in-law does is he flies it over to Tel Aviv, Israel. And what it does in Tel Aviv is it has a whole team of people that basically strip it and repurpose it for cargo. So now it flies for FedEx, or now it flies for Amazon, or now it flies for UPS, or whatever it is. And in Tel Aviv, you have some of the leading business leaders in the field of like jewelry and diamonds. Mm-hmm. You have some of the most advanced medical sciences coming out of Tel Aviv. You've got businesses that are literally like earning a profit for everyone in the world that are based out of Tel Aviv. Mm. And so one could look at that and go, man, how is it that this little strip of land in the Middle East, they have such an influence across the entire world, literally blessing, I'm going to use that word intentionally, they're blessing the entire world economically. They're blessing the entire world financially. They're blessing the entire world with giving work and giving profit and flourishing to the entire world. Well, in one sense, there was a prophecy that Israel would be a light to the nations. Mm. And so I know that's mainly supposed to be in a spiritual sense understood. And we understand that through the Messiah. Yes, Israel's the light to all the nations, but almost in a like tangible financial sense and a medical sense and all that. Like, can you see that at play? Like in that, do you think that that kind of fits into that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's no coincidence that, this rise in anti-Semitism is coming at a time in the United States of America where we're entering, if not already in, a recession and a slowdown of our economy, high inflation, right? Yeah. Maybe rising unemployment, world instability, and you look at like the Weimar Republic of Germany in the 1930s, the 20s and 30s of Germany. It's like that whole stage was set historically where you had a high inflation, record inflation. You had instability in the world, post-World War I, very rocky, political alliances and all this stuff. You had high unemployment, and then you had an increase in German nationalism. And then it was like, okay, we need a scapegoat to pin all of our economic problems on. And then it was the same thing. It was the same bill of goods. It was like Jews run our economy, and they're taking all the wealth for themselves. Jews run the media, so we can't really get the word out about this big conspiracy. and yeah, they're pulling all the strings and everything. And so
Yeah.
when Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, it was all the same mantra that this Black Hebrew Israelite movement is making, that neo Nazis make. It's that they, and it's
Yeah. It's just repackaged, basically.
yeah, and the thing that really is alarming to me is the fact that I learned about this interview by a family member posting this on Facebook and praising him for being a truth talker. And I'm like,
gosh.
whoa, hold on a second. Like, did you listen? First of all, did you listen to the whole thing, or did you just listen to the first couple minutes of it? When you listen to the whole thing, it's like, wow, this guy is speaking some very dangerous stuff that can get a lot of people hurt.
Yeah.
And that's where it's headed, unfortunately.
Yeah, so, and like we've been saying, this is nothing new. I mean, what he's saying is repackaged anti-Semitic talking points that go back a very, 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 very long time. Which, if somebody listens to this, it's like, man, Kanye's not an anti-Semite. Okay, you need to research and study the history of anti-Semitism. Because, like, what he's saying is very alarming if you know the history of this, right? There's a writer named Jerome Chanes. I think that's how you say his name. Jerome Chanes, Chanes. And he identifies 6 stages in the historical development of anti-Semitism. The first is pre-Christian anti-Judaism. You see this in Greece and Rome. And I would say, too, in the Persian Empire, again, the Book of Esther. That's primarily ethnic in nature. The second stage is Christian anti-Semitism in antiquity. In the Middle Ages, that was primarily religious in nature. If you read about the Spanish Inquisition, which was much, much, much later, but what motivated the Spanish Inquisition in many parts were people who were coming after Jewish communities in basically the Roman Catholic Empire, forcing them to convert, forcing them to stop being Jewish and to become Christian. And so that's problematic if you know the gospel and you understand the point of Christianity is someone willingly comes to Christ. They're not forced to, right? The third is traditional Muslim anti-Semitism. And so you see that throughout the Crusades, the Muslims going to the city of Jerusalem. You see, in the Quran, if you've ever read the Quran, one could say the Quran is a very anti-Semitic book. The Quran basically espouses conquering the Jews and forcing them to pay the jizya, which is a tax on them. The Jews are considered kind of a protected class in a Muslim caliphate, which is kind of a Muslim empire. So they're protected, but they have to pay a tax simply because they're Jewish and not Islamic, which is, again, kind of nuanced, right? But you see a lot of anti-Semitism in the Muslim world. Israel is surrounded by Muslim nations, many of which have called Israel a bastard state. They believe that it has no point at all of being there, that all that land was stolen, and that the Jews need to be completely wiped off the face of the map. But that goes back a long, 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 long time. The fourth stage is political, social, and economic anti-Semitism of Enlightenment. That's where you start to see some of the conspiracies that the Jews kind of are controlling the banks. The Jews are money lenders. The Jews are, the ones kind of pulling the puppet strings, if you will, throughout Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment Europe. And then the fifth stage is the one that we think of when we think of anti-Semitism, and that's the racial anti-Semitism that arose in the 19th and 20th century, and it all culminated in Nazism in Germany in the 20th century. And then that leads us to the sixth stage, and that is where we are now. That's contemporary anti-Semitism, which many people believe is kind of emerging as a new anti-Semitism, which are all the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, and Josh, if I could share my screen really fast, there's this chart that, let me see if I can, if it'll allow me to do this here. It's a chart that shows, yeah, I don't know if you can see there or not. It basically shows it's a map of Europe. Are you able to see this map?
I'm not. No, you can
Okay.
explain it to me and our audio listeners as well.
Yeah, it might not want me to do this. I think I need to change my settings. But anyways, it's a map, and I think you can find this. You can find this online or whatever. It just shows all the Jewish historic expulsions from places in which they lived. But yeah, I mean, it goes back. I think the earliest on this map is like maybe 1300. I've got a 1016. They're expelled from Crimea. 1290 expelled from England. Yeah, Germany alone is like there was many expulsions in Germany. 1100s, 1300s, 1500s. I mean, many people aren't aware of the fact that Martin Luther was deeply anti-Semitic and called for the expulsion of Jews and the destruction of Jewish synagogues and prayer books and communities. But yeah, I mean, the reason why Columbus got on a boat and sailed west is because of the Jewish expulsion from Spain in 1492. Some people even speculate that he was a closet Jew, that he converted to Catholicism for show, but he in fact was a Sephardic Jew. But that's the reason, though, is because they were looking for places to go, basically, and they financed an exploratory trip across the ocean.
So it basically was, hey, we're getting kicked out of Spain. We got to go find a spot to...
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Wow.
no, I mean, there was tens of thousands of Jews that were having to leave Spain via edict. And,
Golly, I never knew that. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's entirely
Was Columbus
connected.
Spanish? That's a...
He was Portuguese, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, and the Portuguese were, the Jews were expelled from Portugal in 1497. So, yeah, 5 years later, all the Portuguese Jews had to leave Portugal.
Okay,
and then
he's Italian. He was Italian.
Oh, okay.
But his expeditions were sponsored by the Catholic monarchs of Spain.
Yeah, so...
But that would make sense because, like, the Spanish Inquisition would have happened not long after that, and that was a very anti-Semitic movement by the Catholic Church to basically make sure that there wasn't too many Jewish people living in Spain that were controlling things.
Yeah. So it's
that's interesting.
Really interesting, and I keep going back to this, but like we do this sometimes, and Christians are guilty of this. They find this influencer that kind of agrees on some tenets of our faith, and we're really excited because this person's popular and this person's famous, and they're going to really stick it to the man or whatever, because they're going to really bring our beliefs and our principles forward and make them mainstream in Christian culture or American culture. But we've got to be very careful because once you start promoting this individual, things come out that might not be as kosher as we hoped, right? And we do this sometimes with like Elon Musk and him buying Twitter, and we're like, oh yeah, go Elon, clean house and Twitter or whatever. And it's like, well, hold on, let's pump the brakes on Elon because as far as I know, he's like a very dogmatic atheist, libertarian. Like there's some dangerous things that he believes that I don't agree with.
And it's funny, his Halloween costume a couple days ago, I don't know if anybody saw that. He has like a Baphomet like on his chest, right? Which is like a demonic god, right? And so I think here's what happens so often. Christians embrace conservative values and believe the myth that if somebody is conservative, then, man, you can just endorse everything they say hook, line, and sinker because American conservatism and Christianity, man, the two things go hand in hand. There's so much intersectionality between those two, right? And then we get duped into basically having to defend and stick up for these figures that we embraced because at one point they were advocates for the conservative worldview, and they're saying some really, really not Christian things, but yet we've already kind of sold our souls to them and said, oh, I'm supporting them no matter what. And it's like, no, like you can say the emperor has no clothes. That's okay. If that person is saying something that is not reflecting the Christian worldview, it's okay to say, you know what, I think I might agree with them on this, but I disagree on this. That's off. And I think the part that I really, really struggled with during the Trump administration is I would never consider myself a never Trumper. I think the guy did some good things, but I also never would consider myself an always Trumper.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were some people that I knew that, like, the guy could do no wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Anything he said, they would have a talking point to defend why he was just this, like, Jesus-loving, beautifully godly man. And I'm like, are we seeing the same news clips? Like, what?
Yeah.
No, that's wrong. Like, I don't think that he is. Well, he's just a baby Christian. No, I don't. Are you kidding me? If he was in my church, he'd be under church discipline. Like,
Yeah.
and so, like, instead of having some discernment and going like, okay, some of the things this guy's saying is, yeah, I agree with that, but man, over here, that's really dangerous, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we do a good job at that. We're not very good at being nuanced and discerning right now.
But why? Like, where does that come from? You know, like, why do we look at Trump, for instance, and we there's a large cross section of Christians that say the man can do no wrong, and like anything he does that it is clearly a character flaw or clearly unchristlike, we try to explain it away somehow or say that's just like, but it's like. Can where does that come from? What is the origin of this?
I think it's because we're obsessed with power. So we see somebody that's
obsessed with the notion of getting power,
or like somebody that's in power finally representing Christian causes, right? Because we don't like the idea of being marginalized. We don't like the idea of not having social capital. We don't like the idea of being, like the book of 1st and 2nd Peter talk about us being a peculiar race. Like, we don't like that. We want to be mainstreamed. And so we see somebody that's influential, that has power, that's in the media, representing Christian causes at some point or being sympathetic towards, Christians. And we're like, yeah. And so then whatever they say, we're like, yeah, that's great, right? Instead of going, no, wait, that's not Christian. What are they doing? That's no, right? Because I think what we're really after is power instead of purity. That's my view, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, possibly. And I think there's media outlets probably that help further this delusion, if I could say it like that. That for instance, during the Trump presidency, like he could do no wrong, like you said. And anything that he did that was clearly problematic and antithetical to our faith, it was like this news outlet would be like, he's just
there's
cleaning
a witch
out
hunt
the
going
swamp
on
or something.
Yeah, there's a witch hunt going on. That's why. And it's like, well, okay, maybe, but I don't know. It maybe seems like he kind of is a pompous prick sometimes. Like, could we just say that out loud? you know what I mean? It's kind of like.
Yeah. It'd be like, we need someone who would just speak their mind and would just, we need someone to kind of just be a jerk to the media and to the, and it's like, but do we though?
Yeah, is that really what we need? I don't know.
Because as far as I know, like that's very divisive, and they say as the leader goes, so goes the people. Yeah, and so. We fall into that same trap with these big personalities like Kanye and what did I say it like that? Kanye, Kanye, Elon Musk, Jordan Peterson. Yeah. It's just the list goes on of these people that Christians, well-intentioned Christians, latch onto and say, "Oh, this guy can do no wrong," and I'm gonna just binge watch everything and and defend him to the death. Yeah.
So anti-Semitism, a lot of people are saying, okay, Josh, Gabe, this isn't anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is, somebody from Hitler's SS guard pulling somebody out of their home in the middle of the night and putting them on a train headed towards Treblinka or Auschwitz. That's anti-Semitism. Kanye is not anti-Semitic. Well, anti-Semitism is expressed in many different ways. The most blatant type of anti-Semitism is racism, right? And that's what you see happening in Nazi Germany. But what you don't know, if you're not really familiar with this topic, is that for decades, one could even say perhaps several hundred years beneath the surface before this racist anti-Semitism was expressed. There were many forms of Semitism that fueled that we're going to talk about here in a minute. And so it manifested in a belief that the Jews were the inferior race, but that's not where it started. It started with religious anti-Semitism. So Jews as the Christ killers, right? So we talked about Martin Luther, which October 31st was Reformation Day from our Reformed friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so Martin Luther did some amazing things, and we praise God for that. But he wrote very inflammatory, dangerous literature that basically pinned the crucifixion of Christ solely on Jews. So what would you say to that, Gabe? You're a Bible-believing Christian. I'm a Bible-believing Christian. We both love Jesus. We both love God's Word. Are the Jews solely responsible for killing Jesus?
No, absolutely. I mean, was that so? Like, absolutely not. I mean, was that? I always people ask that question. It's like, was that or was that not part of God's plan of salvation and redemption for the world?
Yeah.
Like, what doesn't the Bible say that he was slain before the foundations of the earth?
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that or do you not believe that? So,
Right.
so we need, in order to attain salvation, we need the blood, or the death, the burial, and resurrection of Christ. So right there we have. I mean, he had to die, right?
Yeah.
Because of us. So,
Right.
And then who did he die for? He died for, obviously, the world, right? To offer the world salvation. And so in a sense, I mean, we could say it was a product of our sin and our decisions that in our iniquity laid on him that
Right.
killed him.
Right.
So it doesn't matter who drove that first nail through his hands.
Yeah.
What matters is the fact that God gave us, this decision-making process, and we decide sin, and that's what drives the nails into his hands, but at the same time offering us every drop of blood closer and closer to redemption and salvation.
Absolutely. Well, and also just if you study the gospel narratives, I think it is very intentional how the gospel writers show that it was both Jew and Gentile cooperating together to crucify Christ for the point of communicating to us that we are all culpable, we are all responsible. It is our sin that put him on the cross. Right? So it was the Romans that nailed him to the cross. It was Pilate that carried out the order to crucify him. But the Jews were the ones that delivered Christ. Judas was the one that betrayed him. So the whole point is, like, we're all guilty. We're all the ones that nailed him to the cross. It wasn't just the Jews. It was Jews and Gentiles, right? So religious anti-Semitism, you see that expressed, like we talked about the Spanish Inquisition in the Catholic Church. We talked about Martin Luther and some of those views that really influenced a lot of Lutheranism in Germany in the 1930s. But economic anti-Semitism, and particularly, like we said, these conspiracy theories, this goes back a long, long, long time. If you're a Shakespeare scholar and you've ever read the Shakespeare play The Merchant of Venice, there is a character in The Merchant of Venice, which is a play called Shylock, and Shylock is a Jewish stereotype that is
a caricature, yeah.
Yeah, so you hear I don't know if you've ever seen the movie American History X. The character is a neo-Nazi, and he calls somebody a crook-nosed Shylock. And a Shylock is, again, a character in The Merchant of Venice, and this was a stereotype that showed Jewish people as a, money-obsessed, money lenders, bankers, people who are just obsessed with money and looking to make a profit. And so this is a quote that, as I was researching this yesterday, I found: "Anti-Semites claim that Jews control the world's finances, a theory promoted in the fraudulent Protocols of the Elders of Zion, later repeated by Henry Ford in his publication, The Dearborn Independent." In the modern era, such myths continue to be spread in books such as The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, published by the Nation of Islam, and on the internet. Derek Penzler writes that there are two components to the financial canards. So a canard is a sensational report, misrepresentation, or fabrication. And so these canards have been going on for a long time. And there's kind of two parts of this. First is Jews are savages that are temperamentally incapable of performing honest labor. And so that's why they're all bankers and lawyers and mainstream media moguls and things like that, because they're not going to work with their hands, right? They're going to always look for a way to get a leg up on people and cheat people and always make a profit from people. And then the second part of that is Jews are leaders of a financial cabal seeking world domination. So if you believe that about Jewish people, you are by definition an anti-Semite. Because again, those viewpoints go back as far as like the Middle Ages, right? But it's a pretty, talk about the Protocol of the Elders of Zion, Gabe. That is a book that came out in 1907, I believe, and Henry Ford was obsessed with it. What is the Protocols of the Elder of Zion?
Oh, yeah. So basically, it's a anonymous work that was circulated, like you said, in the early 1900s, and just basically that it was like this manifesto, so to speak, that Jews were behind everything. They were behind agricultural depressions. They were behind financial scandals. They were behind strikes. You name it. They were there pulling all the strings and moving all the pieces and everything. And Henry Ford had an obsession with this document. Henry Ford bought, you mentioned the Dearborn Independent, he actually bought this local newspaper from his hometown. He bought it out with the hopes of publishing anti-Semitic columns every week, which he did for a long time. Gosh. And then he would actually send these newspapers and these anti-Semitic columns out to his dealerships, his Ford dealerships. And then the ideal was that the dealerships would then place the newspapers into each car once it's sold.
Wow.
So he was basically missionizing and trying to spread this message of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. It's bizarre when you start to lift the veil a little bit on like anti-Semitism, and you realize, wow, who has bought into this and who has spread this, and it's like, I need to take a shower, right? And it's like,
it's so irrational. Like, why is someone so obsessed with this, right? Mm-hmm. That they want to go so far as to buy a local newspaper, write these columns, publish it, and then put it out in every vehicle that goes out across America. I mean, like, seriously, like you're that obsessed with demonizing this people group? Like, it just doesn't make sense. Yeah, so that's, again, that economic conspiracy that we see now Kanye espousing. Man, that goes back a long time. And that's why it's so dangerous. Social anti-Semitism, so Jews is socially inferior. They're pushy, they're vulgar. They're awkward. They're unable to have, social conversations and interactions. Ideological anti-Semitism, that Jews are subversive and revolutionary. Cultural anti-Semitism, they're undermining the moral and structural fiber of civilization. You see that in the Book of Esther. So if you remember what Haman goes to the king of Persia, King Xerxes, and says is that these are people who have their own laws, and they kind of do their own thing, and they've got their own traditions, they got their own customs. They're not going to listen and obey the laws of the Persian Empire, which is a half-truth. Because, yes, the Jews have their own customs and feasts and their own set of laws from the Torah, but you've seen historically Jews kind of being able to function as their own people group within other people groups. And you see it all over the world right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think where a lot of anti-Semitism shows up are in these conspiracy theories. The most, I think, horrifying conspiracy theories are Holocaust denials.
Mm.
It sounds so crazy to say there are people who deny the Holocaust, but there is a growing number of people, many of them in the Middle East, many of them Muslim, but also not. Also people just, here in the U.S., that state the Holocaust was imagined or the Holocaust was highly exaggerated to advance the interests of Jews and justify the creation of the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
That's so crazy that you would look at 6 million Jews and just say, yeah, that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not even 100 years old, the Holocaust.
Yeah, I mean, there's many people who survived it that are still alive today.
Yeah.
And can speak firsthand. But they believe that they're just shills, and that they just are paid to say that. They're just actors. But yeah, it's crazy how there's an entire people group that is growing in size that are living in a completely alternate reality in terms of history and the legitimacy of the state of Israel. And then there's like a dwindling number of people who believe that Jews are God's, chosen people, that they are all over the world and that they have a rightful homeland in the Middle East called Israel. And that's bound to create conflict. That's bound to a larger conflict. And that's biblical as well, that, there's going to be a large scale worldwide conflict centered around the nation of Israel and whether or not it deserves a place on the map.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's what it boils down to. I mean, it's like,
yeah.
If we can circle all the way back around, it's like God promised these people his blessing, his protection, and a relatively small piece of the globe to be theirs and to be their homeland. And he said that you will be like a light to the nations. You'll be like a city on a hill, shining on a hill. And that's it. And it's like, if the powers that be can thwart that, then they've made God out to be a liar.
Yeah. Wow. So this is a spiritual battle, primarily.
Yeah, it's a spiritual battle that is manifesting itself in the physical realm.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Yeah. So, again, the anti-Semitic theories that are around today concerning banking, Hollywood, the news media, a purported Zionist occupation government with this tyrannical worldview. I mean, that goes back a long time. In the second half of the 19th century, in the late 1800s, you saw people saying that the Jews and the Freemasons were plotting together to establish control over the world. I would just say to anybody listening to this, there's nothing new under the sun. That's what Solomon wrote in the book of Ecclesiastes. So if something feels new and you're like, oh my gosh, this is just crazy, like I can't believe this can't, do some research. Like, there are no new lies. There are old lies repackaged as new. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm.
It's the same old lie. It's the same old type of thing, and we've got to have our discernment meters up to go, I don't know if this is true. I don't know if this is right. I don't know if this is godly and God-honoring. And our mindset as Christians towards any people group should be that any irrational hatred towards a people group simply for being a certain ethnicity or a certain people group, a certain culture, man, that should be unthinkable. Whether they're Jewish or whether they're Chinese or whether they're Portuguese or whether they're Mexican or whether they're Canadian, or I've never met anybody with an irrational hatred of Canadians, but they're probably out there. I don't know. That should be unthinkable for us as Christians. I mean, truly. But especially the fact that the Jewish people were given a promise by our God, and our Messiah was a Jewish man.
Mm-hmm.
We should have a different mindset, a different attitude, a different heart posture towards this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Always be weary of someone fixated on race.
Yeah.
Nothing good can come of it.
Absolutely. Now I want to do an episode about irrational hatred of Canadians, because I feel like there's people out there that...
I have a Canadian friend, so we could bring her on. Yeah. We could ask her
about Canadian stereotypes. Hacky and ooses and toques and Canadian bacon. Why do they get to say that ham is bacon?
Canadian privilege.
Every Canadian I've ever met is the most polite person I've ever met in my life. So maybe that's a stereotype. It's a good one. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually have some Canadian listeners. So if you're listening from the Great North, thank you for tuning in. We love you, and we'd love to hear from you. So shoot us an email. I see some guys listening from all parts of the world, and we've got several Canadian listeners. So it's good.
You should watch Jim Gaffigan's sketch on the Canadian map. It's really funny.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks for listening. And if you've got any feedback, any questions, any criticism, any cries of outrage, anything like that, shoot us an email or leave us a comment. If you're watching this on YouTube, we would love to hear from you. And we'll see you guys next time.